What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you alone because we have a trade. We actually have two trades because Thomas Bryant is headed to the Indiana Pacers from the Miami Heat, but that's not super consequential. The Pacers get a big, he can do some finishing, might help them with rebounding, but that's not a massive trade. We have a bigger one. Dennis Schroder is headed to the Golden State Warriors, reported before trade season kicks off on Sunday, December 15th, but we now have the full details of the trade because I, like a genius, waited until Sunday morning to record this in hopes that the pick details would trickle out just to get some more information. Before we break it down, just a reminder not to only subscribe, but go join our Discord. We are going to do a mailbag this week, and the way to get your mailbag questions in, you could ask us anything, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible, is to join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description. So go in there, talk to your fellow sickos about hoops. Lots of fun, lots of good discussions are had in there. But now, without further delay, let's talk some Dennis Schroder to the Golden State Warriors, a trade that I think, despite the way it might be framed by some, I really do believe is going to matter a great deal. So let's start with the details. DeAnthony Melton. So Brooklyn is receiving DeAnthony Melton, Reese Beekman, who is on a two-way contract with the Golden State Warriors. They are also receiving 3 second-round picks. Atlanta's 2026 first-round pick, Atlanta's 2028 second-round pick, and Golden State's 2029 second-round pick. The Warriors, in return, are getting Dennis Schroder and Miami's 2025 second-round pick. That is protected through selection number 37. And so I think if you're the Nets, you look at this as getting pretty much 3 seconds for Dennis Schroder. You could say 3.5 because I do believe that you've upgraded your second round pick stash here considerably off that. Miami's not the greatest team this year, but top 37 protection. So you're not guaranteed to get a selection in, those first 7 picks of the first round. And at least with these, I mean, who knows? Atlanta's playing well right now, but who knows where they are in 2026 and 2028. And just with the Warriors core, who knows where they are in 2029. So I like the flyer and then just getting the stash there. I think and then for Golden State, by the way, getting the additional second rounder is something that they could just throw in a trade that could end up mattering if they decide to make a bigger deal. I think a lot of people look at this deal for the Nets and maybe wonder why they didn't hold out for more. The reporting from, I believe it was Mark Stein, was that they were going to get a first round pick. They wanted a first round pick, excuse me. Dennis Schroeder's on an expiring contract. We don't really see those players go for, like, non-star material players go for a first round pick as often anymore, even when you're talking about a later first round pick. Now, could the Nets have waited and maybe gotten more for Dennis Schroeder? Potentially. But I think another benefit of this deal that we have to know, and by the way, it's a benefit for both sides, is that because neither Dennis Schroeder nor DeAnthony Melton was aggregated in the trade, as in traded with other players, they can now be aggregated in other deals before the February 6th trade deadline. And so for the Nets, just having Melton's expiring salary, if you're looking to take back money in a deal that's a form of compensation, that benefits them a ton. It's just another movable contract that they could have, and teams will view Melton as cap relief. Maybe some teams will be interested. He's done for the season because of that ACL injury. Maybe some teams will be interested in carrying his bird rights into free agency, yada, yada, yada. I think it's a bigger deal for the Warriors just because you don't want this to be the biggest swing they make. Dennis Schroeder, and we're going to get into it very soon, is not going to solve all of their biggest issues, and I don't think is the difference separating the Warriors from the league's title contender clique. And so you want them to be able to aim bigger. And if he wasn't able to be aggregated, then all of a sudden, yeah, they still have these mid-end deals when Kyle Anderson, Gary Payton II, Kevon Looney, even Moses Moody on the poison pill can be moved. But if you were going to make a big deal, you might still almost certainly have to include Andrew Wiggins. But if you were just taking a 12.8 or $13 million player off the table, could only be moved as a standalone piece, that makes things a little bit more difficult to you. Because I think the goal right now for any Golden State trade, unless they're getting a caps lock wing, you probably want to keep Andrew Wiggins because of how good he's been this year. And from the Nets perspective, there's not much to talk about with them. This will be mostly about the Warriors. So let's clear up the Nets first. Even if you think they could have gotten more, so throw out the benefits of being able to trade DeAnthony Melton in a bigger trade. You needed to get worse. Cam Thomas is injured and your offense is still way too competent. You've already lost ground in the tanking race that you want to define. They reacquired control over their next 2 first-round picks, specifically to tank, like to be in the running for not just the number one pick, but to guarantee themselves a top 5 pick, basically. They're not in that territory. And that's again with Cam Thomas being injured. And so you needed to get rid of Dennis Schroder, who's been so good this year. And if the difference was, could we have gotten better seconds or could we gotten a late first? I think it actually is more beneficial to them to have just taken this package, 3, I would say, quality second round picks in exchange for Dennis Schroder and a meh second round pick. Making this trade now kind of ensures that you won't have too much ground to make up later against other teams. And as it stands, they might have too much ground to make up when you're looking at, could they still fall into the bottom 4? For sure. But they're not going to be on the Utah Jazz, New Orleans level of tanking or the Wizards level of tanking at the moment. So those are 3 teams that you can already, I would say, write off that, oh, there's no way Brooklyn's going to catch them in the loss column. And so if you want to finish, let's just say a bottom 5 record should be the goal with this team. It should really be bottom 4 to get the top lottery odds possible. You've now made this more likely and you've done it sooner. So I think there's value in that. And it made sense for them to do that. And without knowing what, like, yeah, maybe they would have gotten more for Dennis Schroder, but we can, one, I think even when I criticize trades where I don't love the value for them, the fact that in that moment, if you don't think that they were just accepting the best offer, you need some reporting to back that up. When it comes to, and I know people are tired of hearing this, it does feel like the Bulls chose chose Josh Giddey over getting first round equity. I know people are saying, look at the way Alex Caruso's shooting now. He can't stay healthy, can't play a ton of minutes. I can tell you with near certainty that they could have gotten at least one really good first round pick for Alex Caruso. And so they opted, let's not go into, impugning the Bulls. We've done enough of that on this podcast lately, but they opted for Josh Giddey over that draft compensation. We'll see how it pans out for them. But for the most part, you're going to see, like, these teams aren't pivoting away from offers that are objectively better. Because let's say when the Bulls did trade Caruso, whatever that was on the table from other teams, it might have just been debatable. I'm talking about, you don't see a team just accept what's objectively a worse package. There's no raging morons in the NBA to that degree, that I know of anyway. So I think this is totally good value for Brooklyn, and that there's even more value to be gleaned because they made this decision early rather than waiting until they perhaps racked up more victories. Now, from the Warriors' perspective here, things get very interesting for them. They are about 330,000 away from the first apron now. They cannot go over that. That's something to keep in mind in future deals, but they were already dealing with that because this only made them take on like 200K in salary total. So they were already kind of towing those margins. It's a bigger deal because of what Dennis Schroeder is going to do for them on the basketball court. And the big thing is those non-Steph minutes. There's the offense needs juice in general, but the non-Steph minutes have been disastrous offensively. Golden State ranks in the 4th percentile of points scored per possession when Steph is not on the floor, as opposed to being, I think they were in the 90th percentile, or at the very least in the 80s of the percentiles when he's on the court. During those non-Steph stretches, some of these, Moses Moody's injured now. I think he's dealing with a knee thing, but their most used lineups without Steph, they do tend to include 3 of Pods, Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, and then we've seen some Lindy Waters. When they're all healthy, I mean, as of right now, maybe you don't see too much fallout. I don't think you can afford to. I mean, Buddy Hield's minutes will be up and down at points, but the player I'm sort of looking at is, because he just hasn't progressed enough as a playmaker, a shot maker, would be Brandon Przemski. If Dennis Schroeder is really good, we could see Pod's minutes in peril even before Moses Moody is healthy. And so that's just something to monitor, because the Golden State Warriors are probably still pretty invested in Brandon Przemski, but they're also trying to win now. And he hasn't necessarily been a driving force of that, certainly on offense. What this also sort of tells me, but we've seen this before, only to see the Warriors not do this. If you're getting Dennis Schroeder, it would seem to imply to me that Steve Kerr will run a more traditional half-court offense, especially during those bench units. We have to see whether that pans out. But like, if you have Dennis Schroeder, you should be running pick and rolls, would be my point. And so, tie him. I know the Warriors don't have the conventionally just really good rim runner. Maybe that's something that they'll be looking for on the trade market further, but just play him with Trace Jackson Davis a bunch, and run at least some of those more traditional sets, ones that Dennis Schroeder himself is used to working within. Now, Golden State does plan to, per multiple reports, does plan to start Steph and Schroeder together. That's interesting. Dennis Schroder can be a pretty good defender, and he is shooting 39.6% on 4 catch and shoot 3-point attempts per game. But we have to see just how that plays out because he is 6'1". And so are you making yourself too eminently targetable on the defensive end, or do you just believe that, hey, when we're going to have Draymond, and if we're going to have, we are going to have Draymond, but if you're going to have, in addition to Draymond, you could futz around and you're going to have Wiggins and you have Trace Jackson Davis and just the season that Kevon Looney's having. If just in general during the lineups he's playing with Steph, even if he wasn't starting, you would still see those two on the court together. If you think you just have enough defensive talent to make up for it, even without Melton, that shouldn't be too big of a deal. And it gives you, I wouldn't say the Warriors need a number 2 option. Dennis Schroder that we saw in Brooklyn is kind of that, but it will be intriguing to see how that scales down to a smaller role. I do think though that he brings a lot to the table for Golden State specifically. If he were on the Warriors right now, he would rank first in unassisted 2-pointers made and second behind only Steph, obviously, in unassisted 3-pointers made. They need just, this is an objective take. Golden State needs someone with that level of juice. And it's not Jonathan Kuminga's too up and down with it, and he's certainly not going to self-generate good 3-point looks. And Andrew Wiggins is always overtaxed in that role. That's really not Draymond Green's role. And you don't have anyone else. Like, that's not a Buddy Hield thing. It's clearly not a Brandon Podziemski thing. You don't have anyone else that is going to bring that to you. And also the Warriors, now this is in part because it's not a huge aspect of their offense. They are in the bottom 5 of drives per game. You bring in Schroeder, who's around the top 15 in drives per game. That will dip because I'm assuming he'll wind up playing fewer minutes in Golden State, but he's at 15.8 drives per 36 minutes. That rim pressure matters. He is not the best finisher around the rim, but the Dubs just don't have a lot of non-bigs who put a ton of pressure on the rim while also being on the ball, by the way. We know GP2 can get going downhill as a cutter and even after setting screens, but if you're, and Steph could get to wherever he wants. I know his game isn't necessarily prided on getting all the way to the basket. If you're looking for someone who has the juice to get all the way to the rim while starting off possessions or ending the, like, not needing things set up for him, like being from a dead stop and operating and attacking set defenses that way, there's really, you throw Steph in there because he's Steph, and there's Jonathan Kuminga, and that's really it. That's not even Andrew Wiggins' game, and it never really even has been. He's always been a settler. So having Dennis Schroder to do that is a big deal. And then there's the playmaking opportunities that should come out of that. When you look at how much like Dennis Schroeder's assisting players on his drives, it's not sky high. It's around like 11.5, 11.6%, I believe. That's still a rock solid number. It's just not unspectacular. However, he is passing out of 45.4% of his drives. So if Golden State is going to let him drive, he will pass out to players. And so if he's going to draw defensive attention, he will find open teammates. Could we see the Golden State Warriors shoot a higher clip off of his passes, and maybe that was repressing his assist rate when he's getting going downhill a little bit? Sure. But to just have someone who's a functional live dribble passer and can also attack set defenses in that way, you don't have that in one player right now. Melton didn't give you that when he was healthy. You're not going to get, like, Draymond, just even from a dead stop, that's not Draymond's thing. And Kuminga, not a good enough passer, even if you believe he's a good, like, and he is good. Like, he can put pressure on defenses, get going downhill. And Podziemski doesn't bring, he's not efficient enough for that to the point where he's going to draw even 2 to the ball or send defenses into havoc. And I will be interested to see how much they allow Dennis Schroder to drive and like the time and space they have to operate where his strengths are versus trying to fit him into their larger ecosystem, which, to be clear, can look BEA beautiful when it's really humming. But you're now integrating someone who he's never played really a Warriors type style of basketball. And now we're doing this midstream to where he's not going to have a ton of time to acclimate himself. And if I think when players come, typically when they're not stars, and even when they are stars, they're going to look to defer even more. But as of right now, even if that just holds, he's passing out of drives about as often as Jalen Brunson. And now Jalen Brunson's a featured option. You want him to score, but like Jalen Brunson working in spacing and just deferring on 45, he's at 45.9% is his pass rate out of drives. That's a perfectly acceptable area to be in. Let's just see what it translates to when you look at like the types of shots he's setting up for Golden State. Now, the macro fit here is super interesting. And so getting into that, you can look at where Dennis Schroder has ranked thanks to B-ball index while in Brooklyn in what I would deem certain key categories. And so I really am focusing on the playmaking aspect here because we're going to assume, yes, he will play with Steph. And that matters for play. Steph will make that easier on him. You should get like 2 assists to Steph per game, I would hope. However, I don't know that we appreciated just how much Dennis Schroder was setting up teammates in Brooklyn. Like he was the guy for like Cam Thomas can be the guy on the ball, but not as a passer. Like he was the guy sort of driving that for them. And so you look at box creation, which is it was created by Ben Taylor, and these numbers come from B-Ball Index. That's basically the number of open shots a player carves out for his teammates by drawing defensive attention. So just think two to the ball or just defenses collapsing on you. Dennis Schroder was in the 97th percentile of that this season. That is going to be an outlier relative to most of his career, but he was doing that on a team that is less talented than Golden State. So as long as he's still getting downhill, he should be an excellent fit for them. Now, you get into what he's doing on ball, the on ball gravity, talk about sucking in opponents. 94th percentile for that. That is great. Like that is something Golden State needs. But if you're going to play him with Steph Curry a ton, even though Steph's not on the ball a bunch, you also have to factor in the Draymond Green of it all. Is he going to spend time with Jonathan Kuminga? Is he going to spend time even with Andrew Wiggins? There should be more off-ball reps for Schroeder. You can look at this in a couple of ways, and the positive would be his off-ball gravity is in the 96th percentile. And so you're going to look mostly at set three-pointers there. That's good that defenses respect him enough. That's a positive indicator. He's also just like half-court shot making efficiency. He's in the 77th percentile. That's pretty good when you consider he wasn't necessarily getting the easiest shots in Brooklyn because of how integral he was, how central he was to the offense. And he was even shooting, I think he's like on pull-up twos, he's at close to 60% on the season. I don't expect those numbers to hold, but like he was shouldering a pretty big self-creation burden. That it's not going to change in a lot of lineups, but it is going to shift some in Golden State. And I think you can get a little bit concerned when you look at the time spent off ball. He's in the second percentile of that this year. And he's never been a super high volume off ball player, like just time spending away from the action there. That's going to be something to monitor because in certain lineups, if you're going to play him with Steph and Dre at the same time, I think that would be the most critical. There's going to have to be some adaptation there. Or maybe you just expect Steph fits around everybody. Draymond Green knows how to play away from the ball. And if he needs to drive things for them, I just don't, when those two are also on the floor, you're not expected to see the more conventional offensive sets that Dennis Schroder might be used to. And so I'm super fascinated to see how he fits in there. His off-ball shot-making efficiency, the 78th percentile. That is, again, it's more than acceptable. I'm saying acceptable, and it comes across as a bad thing, but you have to now scale that ahead. But what I think Golden State has done here is they've made themselves a lot better without giving up any core assets. And so you've still held your powder to make another move. And I would advocate. We have to see how this pans out. Maybe Golden State's offense takes off like gangbusters here, but you have at least begun to address one of your biggest issues. And I would just say the offense during the non-Steph minutes, even if you just want to look at it from that perspective, if you're asking whether Dennis Schroder can run maybe some less talented units and get closer to the league average in offense, I would hazard if you're getting this version of him, the one that we saw in Brooklyn, you absolutely can. And like that is just a big deal in of itself. The bigger question is going to be, I'm not even too worried about the defense just because of the surrounding personnel Golden State has. Now, if it gets a little wonky, if you're ever looking to play him with, I'll say this. I don't think we're ever going to see Steph, Buddy Hield, and Dennis Schroder on the court together. And if we do, then I'll be very curious about the defense. But I don't think this is someone who comes in and makes the defense so much worse that you're concerned about them losing that aspect of their identity. I think they have the defensive depth around them, especially the way that Andrew Wiggins has played this year, for that to pan out. And they're okay playing undersized. All their bigs are basically undersized, and Gary Payton II is essentially a big that is just super small. So I have confidence in that. I have confidence again in him being able to translate what he did in Brooklyn to Golden State units where they're using him as the central option. My question would be, what does he just look like off ball with this team? And then to kind of circle back to what I'm confident in, my other question would be, how much are they going to let Dennis Schroder be Dennis Schroder? And I don't know the answer to that question. That'll be the thing I'm watching most closely. But even if it doesn't work out, I think you've made yourself, or I'll say, I think they're a more attractive trade partner now with it. Because if you're a team, and one, you always want expiring contracts. So D'Anthony Melton would have been that. But now you have someone who's actually playing, who's having a career year. And so if you're just a team, let's use Miami as an example, where if you're getting rid of Jimmy Butler, if that ends up being a trade, not saying it will be, they're not a team that's necessarily, oh, we want to rebuild. And so if you get someone in Dennis Schroder, who when Tyler Hero and Terry Rozier are there, how interested would you be in keeping him? Dennis Schroder, though, he's playing and is someone that teams could be interested in keeping moving forward, even if he winds up on the Blazers, the Blazers could actually use a reserve playmaker. I know they have Scoot and Banton and Sharp and Simons. It's just not enough. But even if he ends up on the Wizards, maybe it's someone you say, hey, think about what the Wizards kind of did with Jonas Valanciunas, even though you're not going to get a ton for him. Let's do this. Think about what the Pacers did with Bruce Brown. If you can sign someone that you're not intent on keeping, like to just use them as a trade asset and flip them that way, even if it's more of a salary anchor, I think Dennis Schroeder he's he's certainly in that tier of player. So there might be teams that you want to trade for him, like you view him as a net positive asset, not just because he's expiring, but because you want to keep him around for whatever reason. Maybe again, even though you're selling to Golden State in that deal, perhaps you're looking to still be better or stay good right now or be better for next season, in which case Dennis Schroeder's maybe someone who can help you drive that wagon. And I think for Golden State, look, they have the salary filler. We went through a bunch of the contracts before. They can still make stuff happen without including Schroeder. And maybe getting him, depending on how he pans out, that will shape the scope of their future trade discussions. But I think that what they've done here, okay, yeah, if you're not including Schroeder, then you don't have those 3 seconds to include. But when you're just looking from let's treat this strictly as an asset perspective, a trade asset argument. Dennis Schroeder, to me, is a better trade asset this season than D'Anthony Melton with a torn ACL on an expiring contract and 3 second-round picks. And so you've now made your team better just by, you're getting someone who could play, but it's Dennis Schroeder who should help. I won't say he'll address all your biggest problems. He will help address some of your biggest areas of concern if he's able to keep up his current level of performance or anything close to it, while then also increasing your appeal on the trade market. I think this was a very smart move by the Warriors. It's not morbidly curious. I'm just fascinated to see how it plays out offensively and what Dennis Schroeder's role looks like here and how well he winds up fitting in. But I am encouraged that I don't view this as, and there were reports that they kind of looked at frameworks that included Cam Johnson and ultimately couldn't get to it because they want to bust up the core. I think when you're not getting a star and it's this early, I'm not going to take that to mean that Golden State is trying to take a half measure. If this is the only move they make this year, unless following this trade, they are like the best or second best team in the Western Conference, I would deem that unacceptable. I think this shows actual aggression because they made the move so early and they put themselves in a position to still be flexible with contracts to move in future trades. So they're still a team to watch for the blockbuster. They would still be a team to watch for Jimmy Butler. They're probably not a team to watch for Zach LaVine, even though they're certainly, I feel like this probably takes them out of anyone who thought they might go the Anthony Simons or Zach LaVine route. This does kind of, I feel like, put that to bed in the sense of, well, we'd rather just get Dennis Schroeder without giving up a first rather than bringing any of those two guys in or someone like them where we're giving up first and then we already have Dennis Schroeder on the roster. So maybe it takes them out of those runnings that they were probably never in to begin with. But this also could increase the scope of what they're searching for on the trade markets, where if Dennis Schroeder is really stabilizing non-Steph units and looks like a pretty good fit in the starting five, or if everything's just panning out for you offensively, does the priority become, all right, maybe we don't feel like we need a traditional number 2 option. We won a title like that just a couple years ago, and let's go after a big man, a complimentary big man. Robert Williams III is still healthy. Let's go take a look at him, and we think that's someone who gives us, like, you want them to run more pick and rolls. There you go. Someone who can set screens, get to the rim, also make plays out of the short roll. Him and Dennis Schroeder would be a good partnership. Grant and I had talked about this, and I'll probably ask Grant a little bit more about the trade when we do our mailbag, because you're going to join our Discord and flood us with questions that we're going to have to cut. Some of them we're going to feel really bad, but we normally try to get to all of them. Still, I think that the Warriors already had more optionality than I expected, because I kind of had them DOA for the seasons where I thought they're going to be super middling, and we have evidence that they're performative and not going to chase a big fish or make the upgrades necessary. I'm still skeptical. as to how aggressive or how earnest, how committed they are to making that big swing. But the fact that they made this type of a swing so early, it bodes well. And so this is a team that had I think, the flexibility to say, yes, you want them to get a number two option, but maybe they are good enough because of what their defense has done largely this year, and because of their depth, that you can go out and address some of your needs with less than stars and ride depth and ride players who might be just get someone who's more dynamic on offense for you. And that's what they've done. And they've increased their optionality even further, I think, because of what Dennis Schroder's value will continue to be on the trade market if he plays well. Those are my thoughts. Let me know how you're feeling about this trade. Let me know too if you're thinking that this might be a prelude to a very busy NBA trade season. We normally don't get trades on before December 15th. We have two trades reported, but let alone on December 15th exactly. So that's kind of cool. And maybe it runs counter to the prevailing sentiment around the league that as teams try to still figure out all this first apron, second apron stuff and how limited and complex some of these rules are, that it's going to really nuke the trade market for at least the foreseeable future. Does this disprove that? Here's crossing our fingers because look, I know some people don't love transactions. That's a huge part of what happens in the NBA. It's a huge part of what gets reported and talked about. And when nothing ever happens coming off of that, it gets a little boring. So let's manifest that this is just a sign of more emergency podcasts, hopefully not solo. This wasn't a one that I'm going to pull Grant Hughes at very early morning West Coast time on a Sunday to do. But until next time, and as always, please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and also on Apple and Spotify. And if you can leave us ratings and reviews there, that'd be great. Even if you don't use it, it does help juice us up the charts. And then also comment, like, help the algo love us back, share our content. If you see me promoting it on Blue Sky or Twitter or Instagram, or just recommend the episode to someone who you know is a Warriors fan that might not listen to this podcast. We appreciate the shout outs, love all the support. I really appreciate we get all the Spotify Wrapped screenshots sent to us about us being in the top 5 of people's listen to podcasts. And that always humbles me that there's so many people that not just listen to us, but also like, oh, we're in the top 5 of their podcast rotation. It does mean a lot to me. So once again, and it means a lot to Grant as well. I know that for a fact. So thanks again for all your support. Let me know in the comments what you think, or our Discord, go join it if you're listening to this on audio, what you think of this Dennis Schroder to the Warriors trade. And finally, until next time, I'll leave with a shout out to the one, the only, the indelible, the legendary Frank Ntilikina.